Moments. 2 balls and 2 strikes on it. Here's the pitch on the way. A swing and a belt. Left field. Way back. Blue Jays win it. The Blue Jays are World Series champions as Joe Carter hits a 3-run home run in the 9th inning, and the Blue Jays have repeated as World Series champions. Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life.
This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show. Once again, I am your host, Tim Flattery, and we are launching Season 5 of the podcast this week with an episode with Joe Carter. And as most everybody knows, Joe Carter had one of the greatest home runs in baseball history. Back in 1993, it was Game 6 of the World Series. The wild thing, Mitch Williams was on the mound for the Philadelphia Phillies. The Phillies were up 1 run in the bottom of the 9th of Game 6. The count went to 2-2 against Joe Carter, 2 runners on base, and Carter hit a 2-2 cutter against Mitch, the Wild Thing Williams, over the left field wall in the Kingdom up in Toronto and walked off the World Series to make it back-to-back World Series champions for the Toronto Blue Jays. And as most people remember, the Toronto Blue Jays during those 92 and 93 seasons were absolutely loaded. I was looking at the rosters today. You had guys like Hall of Famer Jack Morris, Dave Stewart, Dave Stieb on the mound. You had Ricky Henderson, Dave Winfield, Paul Molitor, Joe Carter, Tony Fernandez, Robbie Alomar. I mean, the list goes on and on for the amount of talent on those teams. And they really, in the modern era of baseball, were some of the greatest, almost super teams that were created during those early 90s. And it's really a shame that we had the strike back in 94 because it diminished really what the Blue Jays had done the previous 2 years. And that strike in 94, I don't know if the Blue Jays would have made the playoffs in 94, but it really ended their chance at a true dynasty before the Yankees took over in the late 90s. So you guys are going to love this episode with Joe Carter. The guy's from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. That's where he grew up. He went to college at Wichita State, and really he's one of the greatest college baseball players ever to lace him up, winning the College Player of the Year back in 1981, left after his junior year, got drafted as the number 2 pick in the draft in the 81 spring draft by the Chicago Cubs. He tells some great stories about getting called up, sitting on the bench with the Cubs. I mean, he's talking with guys like Billy Williams, Ernie Banks, Fergie Jenkins, Bobby Bonds. He tells a great story about meeting Willie Mays for the first time. He and I even get into the conversation and the topic about African Americans in baseball, because back when Joe Carter played, he was a great African-American baseball player himself, but there were so many great African-Americans in the game at that time. And so we break down that topic a little bit towards the end of the episode as well. So just a little bit more about Joe Carter, because most people nowadays remember Joe Carter for that 1 home run. They remember him for the Game 6 walk-off in 1993, but what you shouldn't forget about is how great of a player he was, because he was a borderline Hall of Famer. The guy had, close to 2,200 hits. He had 432 doubles, 396 home runs, almost 1,500 RBIs, over 230 stolen bases. Like I said before, he was a College Player of the Year back in 1991. He won an ESPY, was an All-Star a number of times. He really was one of the great players from the 80s and 90s, one of those middle-of-the-order guys that you could always count on to be driving in runs night in and night out. Joe Carter also had a special place in the Flattery household growing up, because my dad played for Iowa State in the late 70s and early 80s. At the same time, Joe Carter was playing for Wichita State in the late 70s and early 80s, and they faced each other a number of times. I bring it up in the episode. My dad growing up would always tell stories about Joe Carter being one of the best hitters he ever faced, and he always told a story about Joe Carter hitting a home run off him that still hasn't landed yet, so not one of my dad's highlights from his career, but a great story nonetheless that he told to us growing up. So I always followed Joe Carter's career growing up, and I remember watching that walk-off in Game 6 in 1993 and remember thinking my dad played up against Joe Carter. So when we started this podcast, he was a guy that we wanted to get on from day one, and it's been a highlight getting him on the show, and I think you guys are really going to love this episode. So here it is, our inaugural Season 5 episode 65 of the podcast. And as always, folks, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. Send us an email. Hit up our website at moonlightgramshow.com. We love hearing from you guys. And we got to bring back our Moonlight Challenge this week, right? Well, this past weekend was Father's Day, right? Field of Dreams. Hey, Dad, you want to have a catch? So our Moonlight Challenge this week, folks, go out and play catch with your dad. If you can't find your dad to play catch with, send us a picture of you playing catch out in the yard with anybody that you can have find. We will send out a t-shirt to the people with the combined age, the oldest combined age of anybody that plays catch this week. So if you're 30 years old, you play catch with an 80-year-old this week, your combined score is 110 years old, we'll send you out both Moonlight Graham shirts. So the Moonlight Challenge this week, find somebody to play catch with, take a picture, send us a video, send us the combined age of the two people playing catch, and we'll send you guys out shirts for the oldest two people to play catch this week. Enjoy the episode. Have a great week, folks. And before we get to our interview, I got to take just a minute to talk about Scissors and Scotch. A few years back, a guy on my rec basketball team showed up for a game with the best haircut anybody on our team had seen in a while, and before too long, our whole squad was getting our haircut at Scissors and Scotch. It's the best male grooming experience I've ever had. You can go there to get your hair cut, shaves, trims, waxes. Heck, you can even get your shoes shined at Scissors and Scotch. And then after you get all cleaned up, head over to their bar for a cold one, some coffee, whatever drink you need in their private men's lounge. Scissors and Scotch, it's the best male grooming experience every man needs. Check them out in Denver, Omaha, Oklahoma City, and Des Moines. First of all, thank you for joining the Moonlight Graham Show. Second of all, how often are you asked about the Game 6 home run in 1993?
You know what? I'm pretty much asked. Within a week, I'm probably asked 8 or 9, 10 times a week.
No kidding.
Because when I'm in different places, if I'm at the golf course, people, recognize me, and that's the first thing they want to talk about. And and I have to remind them all. I say, I did hit more than one home run in my career. So, but from that standpoint, I know where they're coming from. So I kind of kid around with them, and they seem to always want to know, what was the feeling like. And I tell them that, words can't really do it any justice as to the feeling that you feel when something like that happens. That only happened twice in the history of Major League Baseball. So,
right.
Maybe the word hadn't been invented yet, but it's a pretty good feeling. But I get asked a lot about it, and I'm more than happy to oblige to talk about it.
Yeah, it's got to rub you a little bit wrong when everybody asks you about one specific moment when, you played for a long time in the big leagues. You were one of the best players in the game for over a decade, had 396 home runs, 1,500 RBIs, over 2,000 hits, and yet everybody wants to talk about one play.
You know what? Sometimes your career is defined by one instance. Prime example. When you think of Odell Beckham Jr., what do you think about?
Right, the catch.
The catch. When you think of David Tyree, what do you think about?
Yep, same thing.
That one-handed catch. People are defined. That's the way society is, because when you're put in that position and you make a great play or do something great like that, then they're going to look at that because the highlights are always going to show it. It's always going to be in the top 10, top 20, of all times. So it's pretty much put on everyone's brains. And so when they see Joe Carter, they'll look at the home run. I had a prime example. A good friend of mine I played golf with here in Kansas City a long time. And it was just the other day. He goes, you know what? I started looking at your career, and you had like 100 RBIs, like 10 out of 11 years.
Right.
I go, yes, I did. And he said, oh, and and the home runs, the RBIs, the extra base hits. And he started looking more into my career, and it's like, because all he thought about was that one magical home run. So,
right.
It's good and bad. But, from all the good I've received from it, I absolutely love it. I don't mind it one bit.
And that home run, of course, won the second straight World Series for the Blue Jays. But then the strike happens in '94. How close do you think you would have been to winning 3 in a row and really be considered a modern-day dynasty if that strike doesn't happen?
Well, it would have been, Tim, it would have been very tough. If you go back to that '94 season, I believe, once the strike happened, I think it started on August 12th, I believe, and then we ended up canceling the season. I believe it was the middle of September. But we were, I believe, in third place at that time. We were not playing great baseball. And the thing is, when you've won 2 world championships, going from the first one to the second one, we had a turnover of 12 people on our roster. And we really had something to shoot for. We brought Paul Molitor in.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Stewart had joined us. And so it was, Molitor had not won a World Series, and to see those guys' faces opening day when we got our World Championship rings, and they were like, guys, I want one of those. I want one of those. And so we made it in our mind and said, okay, let's win one for Molly. Let's win one for Stu. Let's do this right now. And then the next year, you're basically, you take it for 3 years, we basically played from the middle of February until the end of October. And 3 years of that is draining, and it is, it takes its toll on you, because now you're playing an extra 2 months every year. You don't get the time for your body to recuperate. It's very draining. And, I don't know if we could have repeated that third year, because we were in third place,
mm-hmm.
and at that time the best team in baseball was the other Canadian team, the Montreal Expos.
That's right.
They had by far the best team, and man, they had some Hall of Fame guys, some All-Stars, and Larry Walker and Pedro Martinez,
Rock Raines,
Alou. They had a John Wetland was the closer. That was an injustice to them, because they definitely had the best team in baseball that year.
Now, I read an article in the Kansas City Star that lays out this dream you had that led you as a free agent after '92 to go back and sign with Toronto. Is that all true?
That is all true. Absolutely true. When I became a free agent, I've lived here. I'm born and raised in Oklahoma City. My wife, Diana, and I, we met at Wichita State and got married in my junior year at Wichita State, and she's from Kansas City, Kansas. We had 3 kids at the time, and my oldest at the time in '92, she was 10. I had an 8-year-old daughter, and then my son Jordan, he was just 3 years old. And so he was 3 years old. And so when I became a free agent after the World Series, I told everybody, I told my agent to tell everybody, look, I'm not going to say I'm going to be a free agent and want to open it up to everybody. I said, because, that's not the way that I do things. I want to be honest with people. And so I said, look, it's between the Blue Jays and Toronto. It's between Toronto and Kansas City. I said, that's the only 2 teams that I want to talk to. I didn't want to bring the Yankees in to up the asking price, the Dodgers or anybody else, but I let it be known that it's either Kansas City or Toronto. And Mr. Ewing Kaufman at the time was the owner of the Royals, and we sat down and we discussed it and talked about it. And when the time came to make an offer, they made a very generous offer, and so did the Blue Jays. And one thing that Mr. Kaufman said, he says, "Look, are we in the ballpark? Do we have a chance?" I said, "Yes, you've got a great chance. These are the only 2 teams that I want to look at and who I want to play for." And after he made this really unbelievable offer, my agent asked me about sitting down, and he told me, and I was like, "Wow, that's pretty impressive." And they wanted to know, was I going to sign with the Royals? And I said, "Well, I'm a man of faith, and I believe in and my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And I said, look, when God tells me where he wants me to play, then that's who I'm going to sign with. It's not about the money. It's not about what I want, but I know he knows what's best for me. And so my wife and I, we prayed about it and had been waiting for an answer. And after the Royals made that generous offer, that night I went to sleep, and I had a dream. And I was walking to the ballpark with Devon White, and I was dribbling a basketball. And that, because I love playing basketball. And when I got to the stadium was completely dark. And when I walked up to the stadium, the lights came on, and it said, "Welcome to the Sky Dome." True story.
Wow. The
next morning when I woke up, and my wife would tell you, there were Blue Jays all in my backyard. And so I was like, wow. So I said, I'm signing with Toronto.
Amazing.
And that was, of course, the fans here in Kansas City were very disappointed. My neighbors, they had already just knew I was going to play in Kansas City and be here, and it would have been a great place. But, God had something else for me. And then going to Toronto and winning it back-to-back and hitting being involved in the last out in 92, and then being involved in the last play at 93, pretty special moments.
Incredible. So you probably don't know this, Joe, but in our household growing up, the Flattery household, you were always one of our favorite players. And the reason for that was our dad and our uncles played at Iowa State back in the early 80s, overlapped the same time frame that you played. And my dad always used to tell a story about Joe Carter taking him deep. You took our dad deep in X Stadium back down in Wichita back in like 1979. And so our dad always said Joe Carter was the most intimidating guy I ever saw in the box, best hitter I ever faced. And so that's why you were our favorite player growing up. So when we watched that home run in the World Series, we were all pulling for you because we felt like we knew you a little bit.
Well, you know what? I've heard a lot of stories, but that's the first time I've heard that stories. Tell your dad I said if he's still alive, tell him I said thank you for helping me get to where I got to during my whole career.
That's right. So do you remember playing the Cyclones of Iowa State back in your Wichita State days?
We didn't play too many Big 8 schools back then. I know Gene Stevenson, our coach, had come over from Oklahoma.
Yep.
And so we never played Oklahoma. I do remember playing Iowa State. I do remember playing Oklahoma State. I think those were the only two Big 8 schools that would even play us. And if it was down at Tyler Stadium, which was at that time Lawrence Dumont Stadium.
Okay, in Wichita, yeah.
Down in Wichita, yes, I do remember those. Now, do I remember the home run? No, I remember a lot of home runs, but
not the one off Dave Flattery
in particular. But if he says I hit it off of him, then yeah, I hit it off of him.
There you go. So we grew up with stories of our dad telling us that Joe Carter was the toughest hitter he ever faced. Who was the toughest pitcher you ever faced, Joe?
The guys that I did not know. And the reason I say that, Tim, my game was based on being familiar with the pitcher, knowing his strengths, his weaknesses, what he liked to throw in certain situations. And talking to a lot of hitters, I remember one of the greatest moments of my entire life. Bobby Bonds was my hitting coach in Cleveland, and we were sitting in Texas after a night game, sitting outside in the lobby talking baseball, and because we always did that, me and him did that because he said that I reminded him of himself. So I said, wow, it was a great honor because Bobby was a great athlete, and so it's about 12:30, 1 o'clock. And he goes, come on, let's go upstairs. Let's go to somebody's room. I go, okay, whose room we're going to?
Mm-hmm.
So we get upstairs. He knocks on this guy's door. Boom, 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 boom. And then the guy goes, who is it? He said, Buck, open up. It's me, Bobby. I'm like, Buck. I'm trying to think, who the heck is Buck? Open the door, and it's Willie Mays in his pajamas.
No kidding.
And Willie Mays was my biggest idol. And I'm sitting there, my mouth wide open. I'm going, that's Willie Mays. That was the first time I'd ever met Willie Mays. We go into his room, and we talk baseball till like 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And the whole time I was in awe. And Willie always told me, he said that the way he hit, he always he looked at he knew who the pitcher was, but he always looked for the pitcher's best pitch, because he knew that every at-bat he would get at least 2 of the pitcher's best pitch. So if the guy had a great fastball, he was going to see at least two fastballs. If he had a great slider, he was going to see 2 sliders. And that made Willie very intimidating because he felt he could hit any pitch at any time. And so if it's a mental game. And so if you know the pitcher, and all of a sudden, you hit his best pitch, which is a slider, and you hit it out of the ballpark or rip it down the right field line, and he's like, wow, he just hit my best pitch. Now what I got to do? I got to try to go to secondary pitches, and now you become in a weaker position, and now he's really got you. And so that's what I say to, it's a long story to get to this point, is that I wanted to be familiar with the pitcher, and so that was my whole game plan. And so the guys I did not know create the most problems for me because I didn't know their tendencies. But but the ones who I did know the tendencies and were still tough on me, by far the best one that I faced was Pedro Martinez.
Oh yeah,
the guy was 5'3", soaking wet, 120 pounds soaking wet. But I mean, he had guts. I mean, he would throw me slider after slider after slider, and he had 4 great pitches. And I'd swing, keep missing, and I'm like, okay, that slider he throws me is not a strike. And so I said, I'm going to take it every time he throws it. And he throws me 2 sliders, and I take 2 of them, and the count's 0-2. He threw them for strikes. I'm like, okay, you got to be kidding me. But I think by far he had probably the best stuff because with him, being small in stature, his arm speed, his arm slot, his arm angle was the same on all 4 pitches. And so you really couldn't differentiate at the time as quickly as you needed to see what was coming. Very tough guy.
Mm-hmm. Now, back in the 80s and 90s, you're talking about studying pitchers. Today, you got everything on an iPad. You can do it between at-bats as far as video goes. How did you study pitchers back in the 80s and 90s when the video room wasn't as prominent as it is today?
Well, believe it or not, it started with me in the minor leagues, especially in AAA. I knew that the guys I faced in AAA were just one step away from the big leagues. And so what I did, every at-bat, every game, I had it was my little black book, and I wrote down every pitch. I wrote down every pitcher that I faced, all of his pitches, and then I wrote down every single at-bat, what he threw me first pitch, 0-0. If it was 0-1, situation was the guys on first and second, bases loaded, nobody on, leading the inning off. Things like that. I wrote all that down, and I did it my 2 years in my year and a half in AAA, and then when I got to the big leagues, I did it for the first 3 or 4 years in the big leagues. And as soon as I would, when I get to the big leagues and I'm facing this guy, I faced this guy in AAA. Let me go back to my book. Oh, this guy does this. Okay, he pitched me this way, that way, because guys are going to be familiar with those tendencies and those habits that you have, and you remember facing the guy. And so if I had success off of him, then I knew that he would try to pitch me differently. If I didn't have success off of him, then he was going to pitch me that same way. And so that was my way of studying the pitchers back when there was no video. When video came along, we were able to go in there and break down even more, and that's basically when I stopped using the book. Because, in my mind, I had kind of a photographic memory as to I could recall, how you pitched me, what you did to me. And if it was 2 or 3 years ago, I still remember. I tell everybody I have a good rememory at times. Don't have that now, but back then I had a pretty good memory about that.
You played with some unbelievably great players in your career. I mean, those Blue Jays teams alone had Winfield, Molitor, Ricky Henderson, Robbie Alomar. The list goes on and with those guys. Who's the smartest hitter you ever played with?
There would be, I play with probably 4 of the greatest hitters. You look at Paul Molitor, Tony Gwynn, Robbie Alomar, and Barry Bonds. Smartest hitter was by far Tony Gwynn.
Oh yeah.
He could do so many things. And the thing about Tony is, Tony and I, we were roommates in the summer program at Boulder with the Boulder Collegians in the Jayhawk League. We played together 1979 or 1980, we were teammates in Boulder, Colorado. We were roommates. And so we'd wake up every morning, we'd go to work, we'd ride to the ballpark, we'd play backgammon all night. And to see this guy, what he could do with the baseball, and not just with the baseball, we would go and we would have these celebrity softball games in the off season. And he could do what he wanted to do with the softball. I'm like, dude, really? I mean, he hit that 5.5 hole, he would call it, between short and third, and he just wore it out. And you play him over there, then he'd hit it more to the left. You play him more to the left, hit it more to the right. Then if you got behind him, and then he says, you know what, I can go deep every now and then too. You know, he's filling the pinch, and he'd pull it down the right field line for a home run. I mean, he was just tremendous with the bat, and probably, you know, the smartest hitter that I've ever played with. When I played with him in 1990 in San Diego, he had a bad year because I guess he was going to the ballpark with me, so I taught him some bad habits. Because we'd be driving to the ballpark, and he would look at me, and I swung a 35-inch bat.
Wow,
and
that's huge.
The ball would be 3 or 4 or 5 inches outside. I'd go out, and I would flip my wrist and hook it and hit it out of the ballpark. And he was just amazed at that. He's like, I don't know how you do that. How do you do that? How do you do that? So he watched me that whole year, and he had his worst year ever. He only hit 307. And I'm like, Tony, that's your worst year. I said, my best year I hit 302. So that goes to show you. But I think I was the reason for his downfall in 1990 of only hitting 307.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, great company. People always ask me who's the best overall ball player that I played with. And I will say this, from the first day that I saw him to the last day I saw him, that was Robbie Alomar. 5'2" guy that could do everything. Great, some of the best instincts. Instinct-wise, him and Paul Molitor probably had the best IQ as far as baseball players on the field were concerned. They knew everything inside and out about the game, and they made some plays and did some things that I had never seen before. Robbie was still second or still third base when they're intentionally walking a guy. I know, because I was at the plate when they were intentionally walking me, and he was still second, still third. I'm like, did he just do that? I mean, the plays he made at second base and in the outfield, because he had that much range, unbelievable, totally unbelievable.
Joe, the way we wrap up every episode here on the Moonlight Graham Show is with the 5 big questions. First question is, who's your all-time favorite teammate?
My all-time favorite teammate? Wow, that's a good one. You know, I enjoyed all my teammates, but I'd say probably the best one would be Robbie Alomar.
What was your MLB debut like?
Yeah, I remember my MLB debut. I got a call at 6 o'clock in the morning in Des Moines, Iowa.
No kidding. Oh, of course, AAA Cubs.
Yeah, I was the Iowa Cubs, and staying over there in West Des Moines. And I'm like, who's calling me at 6 in the morning? So I answer the phone, and it's my coach, Jim Napier. And he says, hey, pack your stuff. You're going to the big leagues. And the Cubs were playing in Philadelphia. Leon Durham had got hurt, and so they were putting me on the roster. And I'm like, and so I go from the living room, and I go back to the bedroom, and the first thing I tell my wife, I say, honey, I said, turn the air conditioner on. I say, we can afford it now. I'm going to the big leagues. Those true words. And so I get on the plane and go to Philadelphia that same day, and the Cubs had a doubleheader. And when I got on the plane, I was perfectly healthy. When I'm on the plane flying there, my knees started aching, my ankles started hurting, my arm was hurting. I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? You know, that's all the nerves setting in. It's like, wow, I'm going to the big leagues. And I get there, and I get on the field, and I'm playing the second game, and I look up, and I look at first base. Who's at first base for the Phillies? Pete Rose. Who's at second base? Joe Morgan. Who's at shortstop? Larry Bowa. Who's at third base? Mike Schmidt. Who's behind the plate? Bob Boone. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And I faced Charles Hudson in my major league debut. You know, didn't get a hit, but made a couple of great plays in the outfield in Philadelphia, and that was the start of my career.
Amazing. Is there anything that still nags at you from your career?
Still nags at me? No. You know, the biggest thing that people have about, from what I hear, they go, man, I should have played more. I should have done this. I wish I'd put more effort. No, I can't say that. If you look at my track record, for the longest, I was right behind Cal Ripken, where I'd played 162 games straight for like 3 or 4 years in a row. I played every day. I played hurt, but not where I hurt the team. I had a broken hand. I had a broken toe. I cracked a kneecap. In 94, doing spring training, I break my thumb a week before the season started, and they said, well, Joe Carter's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks with a broken right thumb. I played opening day. I was player of the month in April with a broken thumb.
Wow.
No, because whenever I put that uniform on, I had no regrets because I played as hard as I could. I always did it with a smile. And when I walked away on my terms in 98. The Giants, they still wanted me to come back, and I said, you know what, it's time for me to go, and I'm very happy with where my career was. Even though I was four home runs shy of 400, I said I never played the game for numbers. I played it because I loved it, I enjoyed it, but now I know when it's time for me to go.
What are you most proud of?
I think the longevity. I can look back at my career, Tim, and say that, growing up in Oklahoma City, a lot of people told me, they were naysayers that said, well, no, you're not going to make it. The odds are against you. Coming from a small school like Millwood High School, where baseball was the furthest from anybody's mind, where I played football and basketball along with baseball, and then to make it out of that community and to play 16 years when they said I couldn't hit a major league fastball, that I wouldn't make it, I wouldn't stay in the big leagues. I think those are pretty good accomplishments, and I thank God for that every single day. But the thing that I can say that I'm proud of was that every single day I came to the ballpark, I came ready to play. I put it all on the line, whether I struck out 3 times or had 3 home runs. I came with a smile, I played hard, I had a lot of fun, and I did that for 16 years. That playing every day, and sure, I wasn't the guy that's going to, hit 300 every year. I did it once in my career, but my main goal and thing was to help my team to win ball games by driving in runs, scoring runs, and doing things that if my offense wasn't there, trying to do things defensively. But I'd say it would be the longevity and the endurance that I could withstand to go out there and play a grueling season every single season and not worry about injuries or not worry about those things keeping me down.
Final question here, Joe. What's the best advice you've ever received?
Oh, the best advice, and I speak to a lot of kids and even corporate people. Bobby Bonds, when I was drafted by the Cubs, they brought me up at the end of the season. I wasn't eligible to play, but they brought me up, set me on the bench, and they told me just to see what it's like to be in the major leagues, travel with the team for 2 weeks, sit on the bench at Wrigley Field, get to be on TV. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm in awe. I'm a 22-year-old kid, out of college, and 21 years old. No, 22, yeah. No, 21, yeah. I was drafted in 81. So a 21-year-old kid, and I'm sitting there, and I'm just in awe of all these big leaguers. And I'm there for like 3 or 4 days, and Bobby Bonds, he comes in off the field one day in Wrigley, and he sits down beside me. He says, what are you doing? I said, I'm watching the game. He said, I've been watching you for like the last 3 days. You sit there, you don't say nothing, you just watch the game. He said, who's that sitting to your left? And I looked, and I said, well, that's Ernie Banks. He said, who's that to your right? I said, that's Billy Williams. He said, those guys are Hall of Famers. Who's the other guy, Fergie Jenkins, who was pitching, but when he's not pitching, he said, look, you should be talking their ears off. You should be asking them questions all the time about baseball, about hitters. You find out all the knowledge they had because those guys are Hall of Famer. Don't just sit here and just watch the game. Learn about the game. Okay? Learn the insight, the in-between the lines. And when he told me that, from that day forward, I sit there and I talk to those guys all the time. And so that's how I learned the game. The other thing he told me was, he said, Joe, always be in a position to say no. And I thought about that. I was like, what does he mean? And he meant to take care of your money, to invest your money wisely, take care of it, put it away, so that when you retire, you're not going to retire on someone else's terms. You're going to retire when you want to. And if you want to take a job, then you take it not because you need it, because you want it. He said, but so many people get out of the game and they've lost all their money, and now they have to take this job. It may not be the job they want, but they've got to take it because they didn't take care of their money. And so I learned that, when I was 21 years old. And when I walked away in 98, I was, set for the rest of my life. I was perfectly happy. And, years later, different companies come, hey, we want you to do this, we want you to do that. I go, nope. Remember, ESPN came to me and wanted me to do Baseball Tonight and the studio and stuff. And I go, no, I don't want to do that. And they're like, but this ESPN. I go, I didn't care. I didn't want to do that. Right. I said, because it wasn't about the money. It was about, I was in a position to say no. So I took that literally. And the two best advice that he ever gave me, and they came both from Bobby Bonds.
That's great. And before we get to the Joe Carter Classic here, Joe, I got to ask about kind of African Americans in the game of baseball, because just talking with you, you're talking about, Rickey Henderson and Bobby Bonds, Billy Williams, Ernie Banks, Tony Gwynn. I mean, so many great African American baseball players, basically in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And now, they're doing more with the RBI program to get more inner city kids playing the game of baseball. But even the modern day, we've had Mike Cameron and Torrey Hunter and so many great African-American. Ken Griffey Jr. is another one. And I feel like we need more African-Americans in the game, because it's been a huge part of the history of the game of baseball. What can we do to get more African-Americans playing the game of baseball?
Well, Tim, I agree with you 100%. If you look at the numbers now, I think it's less than, 1 to 2%.
It's low.
African-Americans, if that, playing Major League Baseball. And here's what's to blame. Sports has become so lucrative over the years. You have 5, 6, and 7-year-old kids. They're taking private lessons. They're playing only one sport.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so now all these summer programs, where when I grew up, it was football season. I played football. The day after football season was over with, I went to basketball. Basketball season was over with, I went to baseball. Baseball season was over with, it was summertime. Now in the summertime, I was playing summer baseball. I was getting ready for my next football season, and I was also playing summer basketball. So I never stopped playing those sports. But now, with so much emphasis, you've got all these coaches making all this money to all these AAU teams, the Nike Elite, the Adidases. They're taking a lot of the African Americans, and basically they're telling them, you have a chance to be successful, but you need to play just one sport. And so baseball, that's not going to be the sport they're going to be playing. They're going to be playing football, and they're going to be playing basketball. So we have lost a lot of great athletes to those sports because they have made the kids at an early age commit to just one sport. And if you look at African Americans in football, a lot of them. In basketball, great majority of them. But baseball, that's been the sport that has been left behind because that's, in high school, that's probably one of the most least popular sports is baseball. It's hot out there, it's a slow game, and guys are like, no, I want to be in the gym, but I can't play summer baseball because, now my AAU basketball coach, I got to play summer basketball. Nope, I got to get ready for football. So they have made these kids only focus on one sport, and I think that's why you see so many injuries, because when you do something 24/7, 365, you wear your body down. For me, it was great because I was able to play different sports and make different adjustments, and so, had I only played baseball, would I have been a professional baseball player? I don't know. I may have gotten burned out if I'd played for 10, 11 years just strictly baseball. But because I got away from it, I loved it even more when I came back. When I got away from basketball, when basketball season came around the next year, I loved it even more. And so that's what's happening. They're making these kids stick to one sport, and a lot of the African Americans, they're sticking to football or basketball, and that's what's hurting really the African American community. But I applaud the RBI program. Here in Kansas City, Dayton Moore has put his money behind and Major League Baseball. Down by the Negro Leagues Museum, they have the Urban Youth Academy right in the middle, in the heart of the African American neighborhood, and they've got these great indoor baseball fields, workout facilities that are bringing a lot of kids and letting them see and get an opportunity to play baseball now, and see that this is a stepping stone. And so the RBI programs are great, and they are trying to bring them back. And I'm all there for them, because we definitely need more African Americans playing the game.
I completely agree, Joe. Well said. And let's talk a little bit about the Joe Carter Classic here before we wrap it up. I know you got a golf tournament coming up here, and you've been doing it for 9 years now. And I was looking at the roster of celebrities that you have coming to this tournament. It's a who's who of professional athletes. It's a pretty cool event you have up in Toronto.
Yeah, it is, Tim. We started this thing 9 years ago. We did the Blue Jays back-to-back World Series reunions. I believe it was for the 15-year anniversary. And we played the golf tournament, and I've always loved golf. And, James Dodds and my partner, Chris Samdio, we were talking and said, James is one of the top guys at TD Bank. And it was like, hey, would we be able to pull off a Joe Carter Classic, Joe Carter golf tournament? And I said, well, I can get the guys, because one thing about me, I was a very well-liked person in the community amongst my peers, didn't have any enemies, and I always had a smile on my face. And so that was a good way to start. And I told him, I said, yeah, I can get the players. I said, but here's the only prerequisite. I said, if I have a tournament, I want it to be the best that there is. And I want to have the best gifts, the best prizes. I don't want to go. I don't want to be half-stepping. Okay, and let's raise a lot of money for a great charity. And he said, okay, let's see if it works. And I was calling people and trying to convince them to come to Toronto. That was not hard at all. I talked. One of the first guys I called was Charles Barkley, and I go, Chuck. I said, hey, I'm having a golf tournament. He goes, oh, man, I don't play in those golf tournaments anymore. I said, Chuck, it's in Toronto. He says, I'll be there. Just like that. He says, I'll be there. And when he got there, the charity we picked out was the Children's Aid Foundation, which takes these kids, and we target the kids from age 18 to 25, because once they turn 18, they are out of the system of the government. And so, I don't know about you, but at 18, I was not ready to be on my own. And so now we offered 2 4-year scholarships to the Joe Carter Family Foundation, as far as scholarships for post-secondary education. We'll give away, I think one year we gave away like 121-year scholarships, but it's basically to mentor these kids and to give them an opportunity to succeed with more education, so they don't have to worry about, I got to go to school, but I also got to work all these hours. I got to pay this bill. I got to pay that bill. So the tournament has really focused on helping those individuals from 18 to 25. And once, the first year went around, then the second year, and we added the Skins tournament. We had an after party. We've had John Legend appear. We've had Snoop Dogg. We've had Naughty by Nature, Salt and Pepper. It's kind of an old school thing. This year we have Wycliffe Jean, and the after party has been hosted by none other than Johnny Gill. So it's a 3-day event where the athletes, they put it on their schedule. Jim McMahon goes, I invited Jim McMahon, and when he came, and he was like, I'm not missing this ever again. Moses Malone, Dr. J comes every year.
That is so
Dan
cool.
Marino, these are all guys that I when I was playing, I watched these guys. Loved Dan Marino and that quick release that he has, and he's been there the last 5-6 years. Emmitt Smith, Anthony Anderson. It goes on and on. Just some great athletes who come out because they're like, there's certain tournaments that people have, and they go, no, this tournament is always on my list to play in because we do have a lot of fun, and it is for a great cause. We raise a lot of money, and with 70 or 80 sponsors, with TD Bank, BlackBerry, and Canada Goose being our major sponsor, our title sponsors. It's a win-win situation that the committee, the Joe Carter Classic Committee, has put together, every year. It just gets better and better and better, and I'm very happy to be associated with it because we're doing a lot of good with the money that we raise, chasing a little white ball around the course.
Well, that's great, Joe, and I really appreciate you coming on the Moonlight Graham Show today. You've been more than generous with us with your time, and I really appreciate you coming on. Good luck with the golf tournament coming up. Just looking at it from your website and the Twitter account, it looks like it is the premier celebrity golf event around. So thank you so much. It's been an honor talking to you, Joe.
All right. Thank you very much, Tim, and you have a great day.
Howdy, Moonlighters. We have to talk about our new sponsor, our new partner, Ebbets Field Flannels. This is a company that started back in the 80s when the owner wanted to start recreating old vintage wool baseball uniforms. And over the past 30-plus years, they have grown into a company that makes some of the coolest sporting good merchandise out there today. Hats, shirts, vintage baseball jerseys, you name it, they make it. It's some of the best sporting goods merchandise you're going to find today. Head over to Ebbets.com, type in the promo code Moonlight10 to let them know that we sent you and to get 10% off your purchase. And I think you're going to love rocking some of the most unique and best merchandise out there today. Head over to Ebbets.com, type in the promo code Moonlight10, Ebbets Field Flannels. Tell them Moonlight Graham sent you. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of the Moonlight Graham Show. A special thanks goes out to Brian Sandvig, who does all the finishing and production of our episodes, Brendan Gargano, who does all of our design work and cover art, Tommy Griffin, who's in studio so often with us and helps us out on social media, and of course, my brothers Andy and Neil, who do so much with each episode and helping to book guests and making this show happen. So, but most of all, thanks to you, the fans, the Moonlighters out there who listen each and every week. And a special thanks to our sponsors, Scissors and Scotch and Ebbets Field Flannel. And as a reminder, head over to Ebbets.com, type in the promo code Moonlight10 and get 10% off your next purchase at Ebbets.com.